appreciate the time. Really excited about the panel. Just wanted to explain this as in real true panel form. Really looking forward to the conversations to hear from the clients and the Relativians that help those clients on that journey to the cloud with Relativity One. Wanted to touch base and just introduce us and really to encourage all of you to think about questions or any topics that come up that you'd like to hear more information from the panelists, as we'll make sure to leave some time for Q&A at the end. All right? I know folks are still streaming in, but just as an introduction of who's on the panel, just to introduce, we'll go in the quadrant direction.
That would be helpful if we could see it.
Yeah, okay. I'll let you know. I'll give you a little. But first, a brief introduction, then I'll let each of them introduce themselves. So first we have Glenn Barden from FTI. Folks just saw him on the stage at the keynote. He's a senior director within the technology group at FTI. He leads the UK Relativity team, which has recently become a Relativity One partner, and during which he has worked closely with Graham Jackson and Melina Evstatiou on our team, and Melina is sitting on the panel as well. And also working with the FTI US team to help create a seamless experience for clients across borders. Is now repeating that with FTI Hong Kong, and that which has become, as you heard, our first Relativity One partner in Asia. So Glenn, a little more about yourself?
Thank you very much. So yeah, I've been in this industry for about 10 years now. So as the introduction said there, I'm now working with the guys over there at FTI. Before that, I spent about 8 years with the guys from EY who are sitting disconcertingly next. So I've asked them to be nice, but if there's any awkward questions, they're going to come from this side of the room, I feel. So yeah, I have a background. I've been using, in particular, relativity analytics for a number of years. So that's sort of that's my main area, I would say.
Perfect. Thanks, Glenn. To his right, Chris Haley, the senior director, the director of legal technology for the international law firm Troutman Sanders and its subsidiary Emerge. Chris has over 20 years' experience helping attorneys leverage technology. He and I have been in the trenches working in RAR, et cetera, in Relativity for years as well, and real focus on making their practice more efficient and effective. Chris's other areas, in addition to his other areas of responsibility, he's also managing the law firm's full migration of their e-discovery infrastructure to the cloud and Relativity One, very, very pertinent to today's topic. Chris, a little more about yourself as well?
Yeah, well, we've been a long client of Relativity. I think, as you alluded to there, Brian and I have known each other for a long time. He helped us with our first RAR project back in, or assisted review project in 2011. And so we've been a heavy Relativity user, but recently moving Relativity and a lot of our e-discovery solutions to the cloud is a very exciting focus to help us continue our growth and innovation.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Last panelist, an internal Relativian, as we like to say. We're getting used to that. For those who've been around, it's given Kate Curian for so long, so if we say that, please just buzz. But Melina Evstatiou, she's a senior customer success manager at Relativity. She focuses on the successful onboarding and continual technical management of customers in their use of the software. She's also a qualified criminal defense solicitor, and prior to joining Relativity was a well-established litigation support and e-discovery case manager. Worked on a plethora of multi-jurisdiction cases of high complexity. Melina, a little bit more about yourself as well?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I've been with Relativity. I'm in the customer success management team. As Brian said, or Saki as we call him, I am a criminal defense lawyer. Please don't hold that against me. And I have worked with most of you and probably all of you under this capacity. And my main job and focus is to make sure that whether you are an existing on-prem customer and you're moving to the cloud, or you're a born in the cloud customer, that indeed you are successfully onboarded, and then you're, moving on with your future endeavors with the product in the most healthy way.
You're indoctrinated.
I like that.
Right.
That's perfect.
I'm stealing that.
And just a brief intro, my role is the moderator and really to help hear from the panelists, but just in terms of my role at Relativity, I'm the director of the Relativity One Customer Experience Group. Our focus is everything through the customer journey with Relativity One to make sure they are successful. Prior to joining Relativity, a long time e-discovery workflow consultant using Relativity, but also other softwares in terms of managing organizational groups such as operations, project management, and workflow consulting. So I'm really looking forward to the panel. And we really, as a group, thought through and heard from the clients that have made this journey and started this journey. What are the key things to consider? And so we picked 5 topics and look forward to your further questions on it. And the first was really the technological part itself, right? Moving to the cloud. I'd love to start with you, Chris. And as Troutman and eMERGE had a very extensive transition to the cloud with a lot of experience and knowledge through that journey, can you tell us a little bit more about the technological considerations and share parts of your journey as well for the audience?
Yeah, I think we're at our firm, our litigation support team is a smaller group as compared to some of the larger organizations and partners and service providers. So we have some challenges of making sure that we can compete and that we can provide great service to our clients at any scale. We still have matters as large as any of the matters that a large service provider would have, but maybe not the internal resources to manage an infrastructure to allow us to do that. So we needed to find a way to scale what we were offering and to remain competitive and relevant in the world we live in today. And to allow us to continue to innovate and be ahead of the curve, so to speak. So we've been a Relativity customer and had an on-premise solution probably since 2012, so quite some time, and started looking at maybe a move to the cloud or some better infrastructure about 2 years ago. We hired a consultant to come in and help us try to figure out what the best solution was for us. We have 100 terabytes or so of our clients' data in Relativity, so it's a massive undertaking to move this. There's a lot of concerns, obviously security and performance and those types of things was important for us. So the consultant came in, we did this evaluation, we looked at both the business side and the technical side. So we wanted to make sure that the business side, as far as our engagements with our clients, client perception, the commercial aspects of how we would do this, the goals were all met on that side as well as on the technical side. And we looked at Relativity One very early on as a potential solution back when it was first released in 2016. And for us, we have about 25 custom applications and all kinds of custom workflows in Relativity. In fact, that's one of the big reasons we've been a Relativity client since day one is we wanted to differentiate ourselves. We want to build on top of the platform, not just offer a basic review service. So it was critical to us that we have the capability to do that. And with the large matters that we also had, Relativity One early on just wasn't a solution back then. So we turned our focus to the cloud in general and to stand up our own infrastructure in AWS or Azure and did an extensive evaluation. And ultimately, we chose Azure for a number of different reasons as a solution for us to move our e-discovery operations to. Azure in itself offered some benefits in that, one, it's a Microsoft product, and of course, most of our applications are built on Microsoft solutions, so SQL and Windows operating systems and those types of things. Azure was something that Relativity was heavily investing in, so it gave us, we knew, a long-term pathway, as well as our clients. We saw the momentum changing with our clients. And this is probably an important point throughout our conversation here, but the migration of our clients to the cloud is a lot to Azure. So we chose Azure to move our infrastructure to. And we proceeded to do a proof of concept and hire a partner, a Microsoft partner, to help us with our migration. But it became very clear quickly that a traditional Microsoft partner that's not involved in legal didn't understand the challenges that we face in legal. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we started a migration last summer to Azure, and it didn't go like we had hoped. We found that there was a very big challenge to move to Azure on our own. And so we hit the reset button last September and said, maybe this isn't the right choice for us. It may be for others, but it was a big challenge for a small organization and a firm with our small team. And so we went to Fest in Chicago last fall, decided to take another look at our Relativity One. And it now, I say, checked all the boxes. We did a proof of concept the end of last year and have had a successful, we're I think 5 days away from completing our migration to R1 in this week. So we're really excited. So that was a little long-winded, but just a little background there about story of kind of our journey. I can touch on some of those points, but in more detail as we go through here. But I think it's given us a very unique perspective of trying to do it on our own, understanding the benefits of that the cloud would bring to us, but then bringing it full circle with R1, and now I think that's ultimately been the right decision for us.
Yeah, I have to assume that's relevant to many in the audience as well. I know lots of organizations looking to cloud services on their own, whereas Relativity One is just another option, right? And that really is the broad scope of this panel. Obviously, Relativity One is a big focus of us as a company, but a big part of that is cloud services itself. It's really interesting in terms of that scope, and maybe get into more detail a little bit later. Thanks, Chris. Glenn, with FTI, a slightly different journey into the cloud. We'd love to hear about that experience for you.
Absolutely. So our journey was slightly easier. Sorry, Chris. Slightly easier than Chris's. So obviously we've offered a number of different technologies over the last 10, 15, 20 years at FTI. We were sort of coming in the UK with no relativity solution. And so that sort of made it a slightly easier decision for us. Our US team had already moved into Relativity One, but we also had our own cloud offering of Relativity as well. So we sort of had that knowledge from what they had done, and we knew what the difficulties of them moving data between our own cloud and Relativity's cloud was at that stage. So that was some really useful research for us. We sort of had three options in mind, I guess. We sort of looked at having our own data center in our own office. We had a look at whether or not we could spin up something in AWS, spin up something in Azure ourselves, and also we had the Relativity One third option. So we used a bit of the knowledge from the team as well. So we have a lot of people from the team who have worked in different places, and we've seen all of those three different options. And seeing that we were coming in brand new, moving to Relativity One kind of removed an awful lot of those barriers. So we didn't have anybody at the time that could necessarily support the Relativity infrastructure. If we had to set up our own cloud, we had people that could do that, but that was the limit of their knowledge. They didn't know how to support Relativity at that time. So on top of bringing on new software and having to train everybody in how to use that software, we were going to also have to train our infrastructure guys in how to support that software as well. And we thought that wasn't necessarily the best use of our time when we could actually just go straight for Relativity One. That there was no painful data migrations for us, fortunately. Yep. Sorry. So we sort of thought it's removed so many barriers that actually we would go with that and then see how that sort of played out. We obviously worked really closely with our US team, and we spoke to them and said, well, how would you start? Would you start with Relativity One? Would you start with our own cloud? And they sort of said, start with Relativity One. In the end, that's the decision that we went for.
Yeah, so such different journeys, right? One of migration and customization, and one from real deployment, right? Just a true deployment from the beginning, and different benefits, challenges of each. And I'm guessing there's going to be some questions later, so I look forward to those in terms of the technology. We might come back to that. I think this topic, has a lot in it, right?
Yes.
But to get through, obviously reviewing the technology and those considerations is one thing, and then in terms of the costs or considerations or billing models, et cetera, also has a big effect on that decision or discussion. So Glenn, back to you. When considering the costs of the cloud and the competitive considerations and things of that nature, how are you able to drive the value proposition of going cloud?
Sure. So again, we were in the end we were looking at these two different solutions. We were looking at Relativity One, and we were looking at spinning up our own cloud and hosting Relativity on that. Those were ultimately our two options that we sort of really nailed down on. And in the end, we sort of decided there's so much extra that we'll have to think about in terms of the cost. So making sure that we have enough people that can actually support the infrastructure, that was a real driver for us. We didn't want to have to hire lots and lots of people to do this when it doesn't actually really benefit our clients in any way. So if you have 5 or 10 people standing up Relativity all the time, our clients aren't getting any value for that, but we're having to absorb that cost. And we sort of ultimately decided that Relativity One, there's experts. Experts are actually dealing with how to do this. People are doing this on a day-to-day basis and doing it at a greater scale than what we can. And obviously that cost then gets dispersed across everybody who's using Relativity One. And so that was our decision with the infrastructure. And then we just sort of had to look at it's basically looking at the pure commercials of it. Was it going to be prohibitively expensive to go to Relativity One compared to having it on-prem ourselves? Again, we did a lot of risk analysis on that. Tried to decide which was the best one, and ultimately Relativity One is where we ended up.
Yeah, that's great. And Chris, when looking at those costs of cloud versus on-prem, specifically, it's also about soft costs, right? Management, security, things of that nature. And how did you analyze those in terms of the decision making?
Yeah, well, I think that's what really drove the decision making. If we just looked at the hardware costs and just left it at that, and very basic cost analysis, then probably doing it on our own might be cheaper, depending on how you look at this. But when you start adding up the investment that you'd have to make in managing that infrastructure, upgrading on a regular basis. So many of my peers that have it on-prem, I hear them say, well, we can't get upgrade because our IT team is too busy with other projects. So there's a cost associated with that from a commercial aspect. There's the cost of the security. And of course, that's probably for us was one of the biggest things is that for a small team like ours, we have a great IT department at our law firm, but they have much bigger and important things to worry about than Relativity. And so in security being top of mind for our clients, very prestigious clients, I receive security audits and I'm responsible to answer those on a regular basis, like I'm sure most of you who have Relativity or e-discovery operations do. And so it's critical that we get that right. There's not an opportunity for failure there. So the amount of investment we would have to make to maintain top-notch security and certifications and those types of things to pass muster was when you add up those costs, that's where you start really getting an apples-to-apples comparison. I think for us, it's also the scale cost. If we wanted to buy infrastructure at a capital or a leasing type of solution, not to get too technical, but in order to compete with some of the larger service providers, we have clients that are asking us, well, how many terabytes can you process in a day? How many gigabytes can you produce in a day? And for us to have to go out and purchase the hardware for an on-premise solution that would allow us to do the peak would be cost prohibitive. But the cloud and the scalability and velocity of the cloud, that it allows us to only pay for what we need at that moment and to basically rent the infrastructure that's needed to do that is such a cost savings that when you start doing that type of math, it really changes and makes and kind of tips the scales to the cloud for us and made that from a cost perspective.
Yeah, so not just from the front end, but from that normalization of the ongoing.
That's right.
Oh,
And also, we talked about the depreciation of hardware costs as
yeah.
well,
Yep.
which was something that was, it's one of those things that sort of sometimes slides under the radar until you realise that you spent £100,000 on some infrastructure, which is now out of date and not
or
supported.
even I think when we went we were looking at doing the cloud ourselves and doing Azure ourselves. One thing a lot of people missed, and I know we did, was what the ongoing maintenance of the Azure environment would be. Because Azure, of course, and rightfully so, is changing. The machine that's available today may not be available next month. And so we would have to have a constant team of updating our system.
Resource management.
Yeah,
right?
so that was a critical component. And then the lost opportunity, what we would be spending managing this infrastructure really takes our focus away from what we want to do, which is provide great service and solutions for our clients.
Yeah, I think that ultimately becomes the crux of it. You want to spend most of your money in supporting your clients in things they can actually see. There are obviously the security implications, and we'll get onto that in a little bit. But when push comes to shove, your clients want the best service from you, and so long as you can meet those security requirements, to do it in the best way possible, you want to kind of spend the money in the most sensible places.
And this is really helpful, and Melina is quietly here because all this is happening before we're engaged, right? Or other than maybe our sales and business analyst group, right? And you're making these business decisions, these technological considerations, and analyzing before we even start getting involved with the use of the software and the implementation. So this is really helpful information, I'm sure, for the audience as well. And we're going to start getting to the stuff about actually using the technology. That Melina will get to jump in. Thanks for being so patient.
That's okay.
So great. We've got the technological barriers and costs. Not that they've all been leaped over, but they've been acknowledged or at least analyzed, right, in terms of that. And then of course, there's the clients themselves, right, and bringing them along. Making those decisions on-prem versus cloud is hard enough. But then how to move those clients to a different paradigm or different understanding of the use of the software or where their data sits. Glenn, I'll start back with you. With your business internationally in so many different regions, right? EMEA, and even in APAC now. I'm sure there are lots of considerations, and we'd love to hear some of those and share those with the audience in terms of
Clients.
bringing the cloud along. You're bringing the clients along,
with
right,
the cloud.
in different regions.
I like that title. Okay. So when we were first starting to look at this, we went through all of the contracts that we currently had with our clients, and we sort of wanted to make sure, we wanted to do a full audit to make sure that actually we weren't missing anything that we'd said to our clients in terms of we will host your data on premises. And we thought that was a really important first step to go for, because then we would know what we could and couldn't move across if we had to. So that was sort of the first step that we went for there. And then it was kind of analysing the market and seeing what, one, our competitors are doing, how our competitors hosting their data, but also how our clients hosting their data as well. And we started to realize that actually a lot of our competitors had moved in the last 5 years in particular from hosting everything on their own infrastructure internally to cloud-based architecture. And then it was sort of that decision as whether or not we go cloud-based or whether or not we go to Relativity One. That was the driver there. But there was an awful lot of people now hosting everything in the cloud themselves. And then when we looked at our clients, we saw exactly the same pattern. I think there was a statistic that was on the blog that sort of showed that there has been a massive drive actually in people storing everything that they have on the cloud, especially with O365. People are just pushing so much data up there, and it makes them much more receptive to actually us taking that data and hosting it in the cloud, because it's actually just staying where it is. With some of the integration you have with Relativity One and O365, you're not pulling data down to then push it back up. The data just stays where it is. And that not only is sort of, it ticks that big security box, but it also makes everything so much more efficient. So we're not having to spend an awful lot of time dragging down vast quantities of data to then push it back up. And that was, I think, a major, that has been a major selling point to our clients, that we can do stuff an awful lot quicker, just simply because we're not pushing things backwards and forwards, which again is no value to them. They want the data in Relativity, so they want it there as quickly as possible. They want to be able to do their review. They don't want to be told, oh, it's going to take us 5 days to copy some data down from your across onto our infrastructure, and then we've got to cross it from our processing tool up onto Relativity. That doesn't sort of hold sway anymore. The speed of doing it in the cloud was that was a sort of an all-encompassing decision for us.
That's helpful. Melina, in your role as a customer success manager and really just managing the customer throughout from onboarding, I'm sure that this comes up a lot in terms of not just our customers, right? And our customers are often law firms and channel and advisory partners who there's a customer's customer, right? So lots of conversations. I'm curious from your perspective and in the conversations of helping transition clients to the cloud and Relativity One.
I'm actually going to choose to go back a little bit towards the difficult journey and talk about customers such as yourselves. It is precisely customers like Troutman that provide all our teams with unique insight as to when you're thinking about migration from on-prem to the cloud and bringing your customers along, what are the concerns, what are the actual roadblocks, and everything that we need to take under consideration. And then, of course, collaborating internally in Relativity to make sure that we support you in the best level possible. But as Brian just said, it is not just the customers that the contractual agreement is with, it's actually identifying your end customers. And that is a big part of not just your technical onboarding, but even the decision-making process. We have to help you identify how best to accommodate your end customers. We also can help you identify which are the best customers to transition to the cloud, and maybe some cases that would be a better suit for the cloud if you're going across a hybrid model. Overall, it is a very common reoccurrence in conversations, not just with customer success management, but from the earliest of stages with account managers that have the really difficult job of taking you through all this journey in the decision-making process. And we always stay very close aligned with yourselves and try to best understand how it is that you even need to tweak your wording towards your end customers by bringing them along with you to the cloud.
Yeah,
Sounds like some complexity, right?
Absolutely. And I think we all understand there are some clients who are just not interested in moving to the cloud at the moment. There are going to be some people, there will be some roadblocks. There are some people who want their data, on an on-premise solution. They want it in their own office. They want it between the four walls so they can actually physically see where their data is sitting. We still get that. We're still going to get that, and there's still going to always be, I think, some use cases where clients do not want data to leave their site. But it's making sure that we're as responsive and as adaptive as possible for the 95, 99, maybe even 99.9 in 2 years' time of situations where that isn't a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think it's still an educational gap too, but getting less. I think what we saw when we started our journey that since then, I know a lot of our clients, I think at the time we started, there was, we looked at our top 10 clients, and most of them were either already in Office 365 or going there. So that gave us a lot of peace. If we talked to the right person at the client, that they would be accepting of that. I think for us too, the evaluation is a part of education, right? We need to explain that, you don't want the servers in our big building in downtown, right? That's a Target, right? You want the servers that hold your data to be in a secure facility, and oftentimes that means it was in a co-location facility, a co-located data center. So we're already having the servers, that's where we were before we went to the cloud, right? So it was an education for our clients to understand that, hey, your data was already in this co-located facility. You want it there. There's a reason that we put it there. It's a hardened facility with great security and redundancy and those type of things. In fact, that's more than one co-located facility for redundancy. And that this is just another version of that, in that we are taking additional steps now that we weren't doing there to make it even more secure. And it's not, we're not using the same server as somebody else. Your data's siloed, it's encrypted. We had to go through an educational cycle like that with clients to make sure that they were comfortable with that. To those clients that inquire, but quite frankly, I would say less than 10% of our clients, when we did an evaluation of our engagements, less than 10% of the clients ever inquired. It wasn't like we were leading with, oh, by the way, your data's in, here's where your data is. So it wasn't a discussion that we were used to having with the majority of our clients. And for those that did, though, it became a very comfortable conversation. Once we were talking to the right person, they were usually going to Office 365 or already there anyways. So quite frankly, our data is going to be in the same place.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, that there is this education piece, and I think we again spoke about, there is this sort of misrepresentation of having data in an internet accessible location in somebody's data center is not by de facto, it's not de facto more secure than having it in the cloud. There is still an internet access to there. There's probably less, there's definitely less people dealing with security on something that's sitting in somebody's lab somewhere than what there is for Microsoft. Microsoft is putting an awful lot of money, an awful lot of their reputation on the line for Azure. There's going to be more than one or two guys who kind of know a bit about security dealing with the security, right? And trying to explain that to a client and trying to say, well, why do you think it's more secure just because it's in this room? Yeah. Was actually one of the education points that we touched on earlier.
And I wanted to just put like a little bit more of an international note on top of that. Security is probably the first question that crops to everyone's minds when we start discussing the cloud. And then, of course, here come the questions. And then here come the questions according to region, whether it's Germany, whether it's Switzerland, whether it's Hong Kong. So we always have to quickly adapt to the audience that you guys are appealing to. And of course, we again help you. We're sitting there side by side in that journey with yourselves, our incredible security team. You heard from Amanda before, even speaking to your end customers, trying to alleviate those concerns. And we, of course, have to adapt to specific jurisdictions, legislations, making sure, as Glenn says, it's a very frequent misconception that anything that is on-prem is actually secure. Yeah. Whereas if it's in the cloud, who is touching it? Where does it live? I can't see it, so where is it actually residing in terms of data?
I'm not sure if it's a curveball or softball. You guys, this next question, it's different. But what about internal customers, right? Was it different for internal customer conversations, say partners, case teams, et cetera, or partner groups, versus external customers and speaking about where their data sits, et cetera? Was that different? Was it the same conversation?
I think it was a bit of the same conversation for our executive committee at the law firm. I think we certainly had to review this with them, and there was quite a bit of education because they didn't understand this either. I think, and making sure that they felt comfortable and that they could explain it if asked what we were doing and why we were doing it and the benefits to our clients. But in the end, I think it's just education and how you approach it and making the business case for it. Our firm had made the decision early on, maybe perhaps it made it easier for us. So we have this separate subsidiary named eMerge, right? And eMerge was created for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons, though, was to reduce the risk of the firm in storing terabytes of client data. So, before we've got all this client data all over on these file servers, and the other applications we used to use and things like that. And so by taking and forming a separate subsidiary where we intentionally segregate and separate client data from the firm's work product in a separate system, in a separate intended system that serves that purpose, I think for us helps in the R1 journey has now furthered that, right?
Separation was already there.
It creates that even further in good ways. We want that separation and segregation from the firm because of the risk to our law firm.
So it was a risk benefit, right? Although it sounds like that was an early conversation before the cloud, but same elements apply.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and very, very similar with our journey as well. So one of the things that really helped internally was the white paper. So there is a massive, you guys can talk to this in a second, I guess, but there is a huge Relativity 1 white paper. I think it's about 8, 10, 12 pages long, explaining all of the processes. And also, as soon as we started presenting people with the penetration test results that these guys provided to us, it was kind of, it made it such an easy decision. And again, I guess you guys can talk to those.
Well, really, just the resources. And really, those all come from clients going through this journey and asking for things that they're having conversations with their board or their decision makers, et cetera, right? So it really is that partnership, and it comes from that. And then when looking at a new region, et cetera, those things are in place or being updated or looking for more expanded. And I'm sure it'll be 14 pages by next month, right? It's that kind of document. But very helpful. And it's probably one of the most common the used documents in terms of some of the we were asked for in the early stages when defining the value proposition and considerations. That's great. That's good to hear.
I mean, that would be my first piece of advice. If anybody is looking to move to Relativity 1, just ask for the white paper, read through the security white paper, and I think it's a really, really good place to start.
Great. Perfect. So something very near and dear to us and really has helped drive a lot in the marketplace is customizations, right? Taking those customizations to the cloud, whether it's applications, custom workflows, et cetera. That really is what makes your unique customer journey, right, itself. Chris, starting back with you, obviously Troutman Emerge has invested heavily. You mentioned this early on as a major consideration for the technology, and love to hear specifically how you dealt with transitioning those to the cloud.
Yeah, well, I mentioned, I think, two points. Early on, it's always been important to us, in even our original decision to choose Relativity, is the ability to customize. And not just really great add-ons with the channel, the partners out here, but also developing ourselves and just simple workflows. How do we review documents? There's so many tools out there today that you could choose from that, if you just want to do it from, A, B, C, D, E, F, then they're fine. But what makes Relativity great is the ability to, I want to skip B and I want to put F first, and I can make these custom workflows for our clients to meet their specific needs of that specific matter, and then even build our own custom applications that differentiate us in the marketplace. And win innovation awards and things like that make this super cool. And so we didn't want to give that up. We didn't want to be put into a bucket of, well, you're on Relativity 1, so you're like everybody else. No, we need to be unique. And so when we first evaluated Relativity 1, it did not give us that opportunity. The ability to bring in our customizations, to have access to the SQL backend, which was critical for a lot of those custom applications, didn't exist. And then when we went back last fall and looked at it again, the maturity of the product had got to where it could support that, and then even more so, it could make it even better for us. And so today we have a really complex stuff. So we have our own separate Azure instance that talks to R1 because we have machines over there processing data and doing different things. And so we have this really complex framework that works together, but the maturity of R1 now allows us to do that so that we can continue our unique offering of Relativity to our clients.
It's so great to hear step out of my current role a little bit. When Relativity 1 first launched, I was a customer as well, and got the call and said, what's the number one thing, or number 1 and 2 and 3, and I was like, customizations, right? And in terms of scope, so it is fun to be part of the journey now, but as well to know that. And Melina, I'm sure in your role, you're introduced to the client at the stage of onboarding and getting them set up in Relativity 1, and this must come up a lot. I'm curious, what are the key interests of the clients when they're considering how to bring their customizations along into Relativity 1?
So, and it's essentially a twofold answer, because we're dealing with customers that want to make sure that whatever they have spent a great amount of time and energy building in their on-prem environment can be successfully translated in Relativity 1, which means we need to take under consideration building new bridges and making sure that it's a seamless flow. So we sit down with our customers and we make sure, and actually we rope in our wonderful DevX team and the development operations engineers to talk about those integrations and to make sure that what is A on-prem actually is A on cloud as well. It is absolutely key to them to be able to carry their own work product within Relativity. At the same time, we have the born in the cloud customers, or potentially even on-prem customers who did not necessarily embark on their journey with customizations, now having the thirst to have that extra oomph factor, the differentiator, as you called it. So then they come again to us and they appeal to the talent and the experience of this incredible company and say, what can we build? We know we kind of want it to be this, but we're really not sure. So can we have a conversation? Can we know what else is happening in the market? Can we pitch a few ideas? Whether that is an active learning functionality or whether that is a unique document management tool. And it's exactly those conversations, again, that throughout your onboarding process, and actually even prior to that, between your account manager, customer success management, and our wonderful DevX team, as I said, we bring you to that level of certainty and confidence with the tool.
Yeah. Well, and let's not forget the resources that we freed up in doing R1 or the cloud that were before focused on all this infrastructure work and upgrades and patching and those kinds of things. We now have all these resources. Well, let's turn that focus to customization, right?
It's fantastic.
So it's not like we just jettisoned those poor guys, right?
This wasn't like a merger or anything. Glenn, FTI is obviously a leader in technology. You have your own proprietary technologies and I'm sure multiple development teams, and Relativity is just one of the offerings. And so curious from the perspective of FTI in terms of customizations and things of that nature, how that is for you as a technology company.
Sure. So it was, again, a slightly different journey to Chris. So we had our proprietary technologies. We tried to take a bit of a step back and sort of said, what are we offering our clients in our other technologies that we can't currently offer in Relativity 1? And we did a big list and we sort of said, well, which things are actually really key to the way our clients work and what can we move across really quickly? What's going to be an awful lot of work? And actually, what things are we maybe not doing for our customers that we want to be able to do in Relativity 1 that we haven't actually been able to do in any of the other technologies we're using? And so we had a massive chart of things that we sort of tried to plot these things against each other, almost on like a big graph. And that's how we sort of decided what our development flow was going to be. We sort of wanted to bring anything across that we could really quickly and easily first. Anything that's going to be really high impact for the client was kind of second. And then all of those new things that we wanted to be able to build. Because again, we had the same sort of scenario where we were then freeing up developers to do things on Relativity. So yeah, we wanted to sort of start working out how we could actually give extra value on top of what we were already doing in a part of our other technologies.
That's great. It's exciting for us to hear as well. You talk about the resources freed up and the focus, that whiteboard into a chart, into decision-making and priorities. That's the fun stuff for us. So thanks for giving that insight. Last topic, one we're curious about, the Relativity marketplace has always had full control of the application and the management of the application. So we suspect that there's decisions and contemplations, and you talked about freeing up resources, but those are also people's day jobs and what they do, right? So Chris, how's it been to release control of such things as SQL management and so many other parts, allocating agents, you name it, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the infrastructure and resource management, you could call it in the cloud.
I think it's been there has been some challenge in that we were used to having to think about these things all the time and think about patching and think about the SQL and optimizing searches and all this back end time we were spending. So it has been an adjustment for those team members that focused on that. It's like, well, no, don't just dive into SQL now yourself. Like, pick up the phone. We have this tremendous resource now, and so there's a bit of a curve in getting used to relinquishing some of that. But
the new throat to choke, if you will. Right?
But to just to make sure that we're understanding. But I think we've had this maybe one of the things that wasn't successful about our journey to Azure when we tried to do it to Azure directly on our own was that we didn't have this long relationship with the Microsoft partner we had hired. We had hired them specifically for this migration. They didn't know Relativity. We were having to educate them on that. And so because that relationship wasn't previously there, it was much more difficult and perhaps part of the reason why it wasn't as successful. But choosing Relativity 1 we've had a relationship with Relativity for years, a great relationship where we worked together, we shared ideas, we blood, sweat, and tears together, right? So the reliance on our team's ability to adjust to the trust factor that we had built over those few years of being a Relativity software client to now being a Relativity One infrastructure client it has been easier because of that trust that was built up. And it is, because it is a much more intimate relationship now where we have to work together. We're having a much more regular cadence of conversations of how's the infrastructure performing, what are the open tickets, and so we're having a lot of this, but it's been good. I mean, nothing's perfect. I mean, I think the product is maturing at a rapid pace every day, and there's lots of improvements that I still think we all want to see, but it's definitely been easy for us to transition, just not used to giving up control.
Right. Yeah. Easy, but sounds like still a transition in itself. And Glenn is FTI, right? It manages multiple international data centers as a culture proprietary platforms, right? Just curious from a change of operating how that's been as well.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because obviously we didn't have any experience with Relativity before we had Relativity One. So the only people that kind of knew what you could do that we couldn't do were people who had come in from the outside. And actually, to be honest, coming in from the outside as well, I was quite surprised how much we could actually do inside Relativity One as well. I think I probably had a misconception of I'm going to be losing so much control. I'm not going to be able to run SQL scripts. I'm going to have to overlay all of my data using the desktop client rather than being able to push directly in from SQL. How's that going to work from a workflow perspective? And actually, the amount of stuff you can do is far greater than I expected. So we've sort of linked up, we've linked Nuix up into Relativity. So we're pushing SQL data from one database to another. We can still do that. We can still drive these sort of efficiencies. It's not the case that you're losing absolutely everything. There's still things you can do. You've still got resource pools. You've still got the ability to make new agents if you want to. It's just almost the boring grunt work behind the scenes that you do relinquish control on that. And I think actually being able to go in sort of with a fresh pair of eyes and sort of looking at this and saying, well, how can we maybe modify what we've already done in the past into this new infrastructure is probably slightly more difficult than what we had, which was we're going into this completely fresh. We have no idea how this could work other than with Relativity One. So we're going to build our methodologies around that, and I think that's the way that we sort of approached it. We're going to build completely new methodologies to use what we can do in the most efficient way possible.
That's great. And Melina, in your role, working with different client types, I'm curious from those that have an on-prem and moving into Relativity One, what are the key things that come up or that are most important to those clients?
Yeah, moving from on-prem to the cloud, we obviously take the main infrastructure migrate away. That is one of our key selling points. You no longer have to deal with infrastructure. You can go to bed easy, we'll handle this. So at the same time, that brings a big question in terms of control. Because obviously we're taking all of that away and speaking about upgrades. So one of the first questions that comes to light is, so upgrades are automatic now. There's an automation cadence. Can we have some visibility and some transparency about the cadence? There comes the next question. It's like a Russian nesting doll situation. It's like the next question would be, what if our end customers cannot accommodate the downtime window when you guys are planning to upgrade our Rel1 tenancy? How can we opt out? How soon do we need to communicate? What are the workarounds? These are two key questions that crop up. And of course, at the same time, it is about access. Like as Glenn was highlighting, we provide new customers, whether they're being onboarded or even from before their onboarding period, with full transparency as to what they can control, the permissions that they have, the level of permissions. How customizable is that? For any one of you who may embark in a Rel1 journey, I think the ongoing joke in Relativity is that the first time you log in your Rel1 tenancy, you see about 106 system admins within there, and everybody panics. Who are all these people and what are they doing in my tenancy? And then they pick up the phone and they speak to Rel1 support, and immediately they're all system admins from Relativity. They do not have access to your environment because this is where our lovely Lockbox application comes into place. So there is a big wall and a big barrier between our Rel1 tenants and Relativity, and we only need to have specific consent and It needs to be granted by yourself so that we can actually access your data. So there's a lot of questions that crop to light in terms of control, and also in terms of how much do you control, and what if you want to do those, what if you want to give those specific users only that square of permissions in 3 workspaces? Can you do that? How easy is that? All of those questions we deal with practically on a daily basis.
Yeah. I don't think we, for us, I don't think there was nothing that we did before that we are prevented from doing now. If anything, it's just easier now, right? It's just the easy button. We don't have to worry about those things. So it's been, I think there were some skepticism on our team about, who's in here,
Right.
what are they doing,
Right.
what can we
Sure.
do, what can we not do, will I still
Absolutely.
be able to run this SQL script, those kinds of things, and all those have been answered perfectly, I think, in all the good ways. We've been very, very pleased with it so far.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that actually really struck me is I used to spend hours and hours and hours on the phone, on a WebEx with customer support. So, if something had gone wrong, I think my record was something like 14 hours on a phone call with one poor person in Chicago. Once you have Relativity One and you've given somebody access to do something, they can just go away and do that in the background. So I had an issue when I was doing some of the testing with RIP. And so I said to the guys, well, look, it's a demo workspace. I'll give you complete admin access to it. Go and do what you need to do. And it took them 2 or 3 days to actually, it was quite a big problem that we stumbled across. It's my fault. But yeah, these guys sort of came in and were doing all of that in the background for 2 or 3 days. I wasn't having to sit on a WebEx. I wasn't having to sit and share my screen. It meant I could do work alongside it. I could actually work on client projects while this demo case was being fixed. So I think that's something which is just, it's a groundbreaking, it's an amazing thing to be able to do.
I have so many other questions just on the fly, but I promised we have about 10 more minutes, and I wanted to make sure we left time for Q&A from the audience. Any questions from group? Yeah?
What about tools like Brainspace, Blackout, Melody, all these third-party add-ons that, like you said, we may have spent a lot of money on already?
Yeah, we have almost every one you've just mentioned in our R1 environment. So, and some of them, if they're close ISV partners, that we're able to make those installations directly in R1. And then there's some that we've had to create this, what we call a sidecar Azure instance that's VPN connection into R1 because the processing engine for that maybe translation service needs to be on a special VM that Relativity is not going to run for us, right? But we just put it in this little sidecar, connect the 2 instances, and so that's been a great solution. So everything that we had before, and even again, we have custom agents and custom things. So all those things are taken care of. And not to get too technical, but we have a custom agent server that we use to run custom agents. So all those things have been thought through, and there's those capabilities in R1.
So not to get free consulting, but how do you have Brainspace set up?
That's the one we don't have yet, but you would just have the processing server in this sidecar Azure, and that would be connected into R1.
I know Melina's managed a client that had brain.
I've actually gone through this exercise with a global advisory firm in terms of bringing their integration with Brainspace over to the cloud. And I will say that the most useful part of this exercise was that we found that Relativity was acting as an advocate towards Brainspace for our customer. We wanted to make sure that all the nuts and bolts were tightly screwed even, and that everything that they were doing on their on-prem environment, as I said, was fully and successfully translated in the cloud. And we have indeed seen it working, that's correct, and I swear to God, we've gone through this exercise, which actually started before they signed on as a cloud customer.
Our experience is that Relativity is already working on all these ISV partners in R1 themselves.
Yeah.
So when we went to go do the installation, it's like, well, what VM specifically in the Azure Marketplace did you use? And Relativity's like, oh, here, it's this. This is the VM you want to use for that product. So they had already been testing it.
Yeah, for each of those, we do work closely, and there are some custom configurations and things on both sides, but absolutely, whether they are things we've worked with directly or whether they are things you're looking to implement, obviously the latter might take a little bit longer, but something that we're really committed to. So
I think it's quite interesting as well with the upgrading process of Relativity One because of these guys sort of working with Relativity with their upgrades, actually the chances of something going catastrophically wrong when you do one of these micro updates is actually quite low, whereas the amount of times I've upgraded from Relativity 6 to Relativity 7 and everything has fallen over, and then we had to we had to go backwards and we had to work out how we can get things to be compatible again and how we can get everything to play nicely and all the data to talk to each other. It takes away the pain of having to do that because these guys have got these relationships and are doing that themselves.
Yep. We can talk more after Gets Your Fears. Any questions? Anything that we touched on, maybe add some more detail or anecdotes?
How much control do we have on the automatic upgrades that everyone has?
How much what?
How much
Control.
Control.
that the customer has on the upgrades?
Sure.
For example, if you are using some custom applications for a workflow and if Relativity is upgrading
Right.
and if the API is changed or something, then
Yeah.
how do you control that?
Yep.
Get a time frame where we can upgrade our applications before that upgrade happens?
Yeah, so there's about for what I'll call minor changes, and I've let Relativity speak for themselves, but our experience has been is that we have a 30-day notice, right? So we know what's coming 30 days in advance. We have a sandbox, Andrew alluded to there, that allows us to do all of our testing. There's also a preview if you just want to see the new features, but the sandbox actually lets you see, actually test your applications and customizations 30 days in advance. But you mentioned a couple of terms there that caught my attention because big things like API changes and other things like that, we're going to get much more notice than that. I don't know what's the policy line, but at least I would assume 90 days or so
90 day
on that. So you're going to get so you have change control opportunities to go. We have a change control board. I'm sure most of you do. You have to go through all these things. So we do have that opportunity to follow our own internal practices to make sure that we're controlling change in an appropriate way and avoid breaks.
I love that our client just answered that. That was really awesome. But if you ever want to get confused with a Relativity support or success person, talk about what version that is. Is it early access, which is the 30 day before? Is it the monthly, which goes into Rel 1, or the on-prem, which comes a month later? But essentially, if you think of on-prem to early access, it's actually a 60-day window, but it's 30 days in terms of the upgrade to Relativity 1, to be more specific. You did ask about sort of control of the actual upgrade itself. Did you mean in terms of the timing, or you were just more talking about like the custom applications?
I was thinking about the timing. So
Yeah.
would it be an automatic upgrade and the next day, my applications are broken?
Yeah.
Because it was an upgrade that was done.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's where the sandbox and the 30-day early access or preview. Again, he mentioned, so we refer to sandbox as where you can use the custom application testing, et cetera, some manipulation. Preview is more about the user's release readiness in terms of features, et cetera, not as manipulatable. Is that a word? But really just a workspace level analysis of the features that are coming so that you can prepare your teams, et cetera, and both are provided.
Yeah, and I think the direct answer for us, unless something's changed that I'm not aware, we can't say no. But I think that's a double-edged sword, right? I think before, when we could say no, I think that caused us to delay unnecessarily. I think this almost forces us to stay on a cadence. We know it. It's something we can plan for. Every 30 days, we've got to be ready. We're going to do this testing. We're going to have a committee that meets to deal with this. We're going to go through a change control process. So it's a much more deliberate process for us now than before. I was like, we're busy. We'll just wait. But then that's a disservice to our clients. So I think this is the double-edged sword is, yes, it's required and it happens, but it forces our hand and makes us do things that are great for our clients.
Yeah, I think that delay point is actually really important. So the fact that when you're doing these automatic upgrades, it's such a tiny little upgrade that the chance of something catastrophic going wrong is quite small. Whereas if you have the ability to delay, what tends to happen, as we all know, is that somebody will say, actually, this project isn't going to upgrade properly because I'm scared that a client's going to shout at me. And then 6 months later, the same question will be asked, and they'll still be scared. And then 12 months later, and then suddenly you're on Relativity version 5, and you don't have any of the features everybody else has. And that's not what anybody wants. These guys are. When you have these small upgrades, you have sort of a list of maybe 2 or 3 bullet points of things that are going to change. I think the last one that we had was the ability to do email threading in German. That was the last bullet point we had, which is a tiny little bullet point. Whereas if you're 12 months behind, you have to put together all of these little bullet points, and the chances are you're going to have to change stuff, and you're going to have to change stuff considerably, as opposed to doing lots of little changes as you go along.
Yeah, I call it chasing the version, right? When you think about the on-prem and which version and to analyze and test, et cetera, right? That certainly changes. It's maybe the best way to put it for Relativity 1.
Good.
Any work with Office 365 I mean, obviously there's a way to export directly from O365 when you're searching. So just go straight to a natural blob. Have you pointed Rel1 processing to a blob? Just say go.
You guys may. We haven't yet. Well, we found two things on our clients so far. We just had a big client roundtable at our firm, and while they're all using Office 365, very few are using. Maybe they see Rocky later, but very few are using the advanced e-discovery features, right? Because either they don't have the E5 license or those kinds of things. So.
Even with E3, I mean, you
Yeah, so none of our clients we found were using the let me export a load file out and then we could rip it in. But what we have seen, and we've done already with a couple clients, is the transfer of data between their Azure storage container and ours, instead of going down then back up. Oh, super fast. So that was a great experience for us in working with those clients where, hey, here's all the PST files of these 20 people. I mean, it took almost no time compared to what it would have taken to come up and come down.
And I'd love, Alex Moy, I'm going to put you on the spot because there's a roadmap item coming that sort of accelerates the interface of that.
Yep. Really excited. Later this year, we're going to introduce.
Don't make everyone turn around. Alex Moy, product manager for Relativity One, or senior manager. Excuse me.
We're really excited about a really powerful feature later this year that we call Cloudflect, and our first focus of that is going to be on Office 365. It's going to essentially allow within the Relativity application to hook into your E3 or E5, pull in from your Relativity application, and essentially automatically send that into processing. So we're taking what we have today, which is more of a RIP-based integration,
it's
to
integration.
something that's fully integrated with the application that's coming out later this year.
About legal hold. So like legal hold notification within Office 365 is lacking severely. So you guys have like a legal hold. I don't know if it's
Yep.
We do.
if it's
Yep.
still being like
We're
developed out or if there's some sort of
It's got all the consent and notifications. It's got preserved in place with the Microsoft Office suite. It's fully integrated. It's going to be fully integrated with that Cloudflare that I just talked about.
Yeah, we're a big legal hold client, and we actually offer legal hold as a service to our corporate clients. None of them have quite gone the step of using the hold in place integration yet. I think that might be one step too far of letting us from our Relativity instance lock something down in their instance. But we do have several clients that are using. They have their own private legal hold workspace on our instance that they manage and they use to send their notices. And that's worked very successfully in an augmentation of their Office 365 implementation where they don't have the notice capability yet.
I swear we didn't plant you in the audience. Those are great questions, though. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate it. Yeah.
there's like 80 questions being funneled to me.
Okay. Thanks for answering on the fly, Alex. I was like, Alex. Perfect.
Yeah.
We're almost at time of any last questions, and I'd love to hear some last comments from the panel if you have them. Anyone?
People can smell the food.
Sir.
Are you hearing any other demand for other cloud platforms to be integrated directly into Relativity One? So where are you going after 365? Or is that?
Yeah, as far as other cloud sources for collection,
Yeah.
we're looking at a lot of them. I don't think we have any firm plans in place. I've heard Box has Box being one of the ones that are high up on our list, but I can connect you with their collection product manager who's here and can tell you more details.
Great. I know we're at time. Any last words from the panel? Any thoughts? Or maybe talk to you after?
Yeah, I just think in general, R1 or cloud, I think my kind of parting thought is that having gone through this journey over the last year and a half or two, even in just that short time, the culture and change of the mindset of, can I go to the cloud, has changed rapidly. And I had a call just a couple weeks ago from a client that was inquiring about R1. And not of using it for me, but for themselves. And 2 years ago, they would have been so anti-cloud. I would thought this would be the last client, financial institution that would ever want to go to the cloud. And I think so that spoke volumes to me about there has been a shift in a wave of change in the mindset of is the cloud actually is better, and it's not just something that we're going to be scared of anymore.
Yeah, actually, to be fair, I echo an awful lot of what Chris has said, though. I think there has been this real change in what people are happy to do. And I think there's going to come a time where the clients that are not based on the cloud are going to be in a real minority, and actually are probably going to be looking at spending more money themselves on e-discovery, because it's going to be so much more difficult for us to get hold of their data and push it up into a version of Relativity that isn't based on the cloud, that ultimately they're going to sort of be spending more money just for that level of security.
All I had to add is that I concur. It is a much more mature process, and we have all experienced that internally. There's an army of resources currently behind the cloud. The cloud is following the sun, so you can see where we're going with the data centers, but also it's incredibly useful for us to keep hearing from you. Where do you want us next, and why do you want us there? Because I promise you that does dictate massive decisions within our company, and we want to make sure that we are tailoring the product to your requirements as best as we can.
Perfect.
So come speak to us.
Appreciate you staying a few minutes after. Please, comments as well. We're always really big on feedback and make iterations based on that feedback. So please don't hesitate, and look forward to that. And feel free to speak to the panelists as well out